For over 2 decades, I've lived with this secret, a secret so shameful that even whispering it feels like poison. But here I am, unburdening myself to the listening room 808. You promise not to judge, but I can't imagine how anyone could hear this and not hate me. Maybe I deserve it. It was the summer of 2003. I was 24, broke, and utterly miserable. My life was nothing like I'd imagined it would be. When I pictured adulthood, I saw freedom, excitement, and opportunity. Instead, I was trapped in a dead-end job, living in a crumbling apartment, and raising a 2-year-old daughter, Bella, on my own. Bella wasn't part of the plan. She was the result of a one-night stand with a man whose name I barely remembered. He disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant, leaving me to figure out parenthood alone. I tried to love her, I really did. But every time I looked at Bella, all I could see was everything I'd lost. My freedom, my dreams, my youth. She was a constant reminder of my failures. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the resentment. That summer, the walls started closing in. The daycare I relied on suddenly shut down, and my boss wasn't exactly understanding about my new scheduling conflicts. Every day felt like a fight to survive, juggling diapers, bills, and an endless stream of judgmental looks from people who thought they knew my life better than I did. One afternoon, after yet another screaming match with my landlord about rent, I packed Bella into my beat-up car and decided we needed a break. I didn't have a destination in mind, just an overwhelming urge to drive and escape, even if only for a few hours. Bella was unusually quiet that day, sitting in her car seat with her little stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her hands. I remember glancing at her in the rearview mirror, feeling a pang of guilt. She deserved better than me. We stopped at a gas station somewhere off the highway. It was one of those desolate places that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. I bought Bella a juice box and some crackers, then carried her inside to use the restroom. It was in that dingy, fluorescent-lit bathroom that something inside me broke. I looked at myself in the mirror. Unwashed hair, dark circles under my eyes, clothes that didn't fit anymore. And I hated what I saw. I hated the woman I'd become. And then I looked at Bella, sitting on the grimy counter, happily munching her crackers, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. She was so small, so innocent, so utterly dependent on me. And that's when the thought hit me. What if I just left? It wasn't the first time I'd thought about it, but it was the first time it felt possible. I could walk out of that bathroom, get in the car, and drive away. No more sleepless nights, no more suffocating responsibility, no more feeling like a failure every single day. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at her. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. When I finally moved, it was like I was on autopilot. I kissed Bella on the forehead, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked out. I got in the car and drove away, leaving my daughter in that gas station bathroom with nothing but her stuffed rabbit and half a juice box. I drove for hours, crying so hard I could barely see the road. A part of me kept screaming to turn back, to fix what I'd done. But the louder part, the part that had been drowning for 2 years, told me this was my chance to start over. That night, I checked into a motel under a fake name. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the knock on the door that never came. The next morning, the guilt hit me like a freight train. I turned on the TV, half expecting to see news of a missing child plastered across the screen. But there was nothing. I spent the next week glued to the news, waiting for the story to break. When it didn't, I convinced myself that someone had found Bella and taken her to the authorities. Maybe she'd been adopted by a loving family, people who could give her the life I couldn't. It was a lie, but it was the only thing that kept me from driving off a bridge. Over the years, I've told myself 100 different versions of what happened to Bella. In some, she's happy and thriving, surrounded by people who love her. In others, she's angry and broken, cursing the mother who abandoned her. I'll never know the truth. And maybe that's what I deserve. So why am I sharing this now? Because after 20 years of running, I'm tired. Tired of pretending I'm someone I'm not. Tired of carrying this secret like a chain around my neck. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to be heard. But if there's one thing I've learned in 2 decades, it's that silence is its own kind of punishment. To Bella, wherever you are, I'm sorry. I was weak, selfish, and scared, and I failed you in the worst way imaginable. To the listening room 808, thank you for letting me say the words I've been too afraid to speak for 20 years. I never thought I'd find myself here, unburdening a secret that's defined my entire adult life. But the listening room 808 promises no judgment, and after all these years, that's what I desperately need. Someone to just listen. Because the truth I've been carrying would destroy my family if it ever came out. 15 years ago, I made a choice. A selfish, cowardly choice, and I've been lying to everyone, including myself, ever since. It started on a summer evening when I was 22 and dating Paul, the man I'd eventually marry. Paul was perfect in so many ways. Kind, dependable, a man with a plan for his life. He was everything I thought I wanted, everything I thought I needed. But then there was Derek. Derek was the opposite of Paul in every way. He was reckless, passionate, unpredictable, a storm to Paul's calm. We were never supposed to be more than a fleeting thing, but those weeks with him were intoxicating. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before, and I couldn't resist being swept up in his chaos. I told myself it was harmless fun, just a little rebellion before settling down with Paul. But life has a way of taking your worst mistakes and amplifying them. A month after I ended things with Derek, I found out I was pregnant. Paul was ecstatic when I told him. He dropped to his knees, kissed my stomach, and said it was the happiest day of his life. Watching his joy was like a dagger to my chest because, deep down, I knew there was a chance the baby wasn't his. I did the math over and over again, but the timeline was hazy. It could have been Paul's, but it could just as easily have been Derek's. I had a choice to make. I told myself the truth didn't matter. Paul would be a wonderful father, the kind of man who would always be there for me and our child. Derek? He wasn't father material. He didn't even know how to take care of himself, let alone a baby. So I made the choice to lie. I told Paul he was the father and never looked back. For a while, it was easy to believe my own story. Paul and I got married before our son Ethan was born. Watching Paul with Ethan was everything I'd hoped for. He was a doting father, patient and loving in ways I didn't even know were possible. But Ethan started to grow, and with every year that passed, my lie became harder to ignore. Ethan doesn't look like Paul. He has Derek's dark hair, his sharp jawline, his deep-set eyes. Whenever someone comments on how Ethan must take after my side of the family, I force a laugh and change the subject. The worst part is, Ethan doesn't just look like Derek, he acts like him too. He's fiery, impulsive, full of a passion that's completely foreign to Paul's steady nature. Watching Ethan is like seeing a ghost, a constant reminder of the truth I've buried. 15 years of living this lie has been exhausting. Every family dinner, every Christmas morning, every parent-teacher conference is a minefield of guilt. I can't look at Ethan without wondering if he'll hate me when he finds out. And he will find out, because secrets like this don't stay buried forever. Last month, Ethan needed a blood test after a minor accident. The doctor casually mentioned that his blood type didn't match Paul's. I brushed it off, made up some excuse about recessive genes, but I could see the doubt flicker in Paul's eyes. It's only a matter of time before he starts asking questions. And when he does, the life I've built will come crashing down. So here I am, confessing to a room full of strangers because I can't bring myself to tell the people who matter most. I know I've robbed Ethan of the chance to know his real father. I know I've built my marriage on a foundation of lies, and I know that when the truth comes out, I'll lose everything. But for now, I'm holding on to the last shreds of the life I created. For now, I'm choosing to keep my secret, even as it eats away at me. To the listening room, thank you for giving me a space to say the words I've been too afraid to speak. To Ethan, if you ever hear this, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. And to Paul, I'm so sorry. You deserve the truth. You deserved so much better than me. This is my truth. Do with it what you will. I never imagined I'd be writing to a platform like the Listening Room 808. But when you've spent decades hiding the kind of truth that can shatter lives, you start to wonder if it's possible to keep carrying it alone. So here I am, unburdening the one thing that has eaten away at me for 28 years. This is my confession, and I know that even though this is supposed to be a judgment-free space, you might still find it impossible not to judge me. That's okay. I judge myself every day. In 1996, I was 23 and reckless. I had grown up in a small, conservative town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents were strict, church-going folk who believed their daughters were supposed to marry young, stay home, and have babies. But I wasn't like my sisters. I wanted more than the suffocating life my parents had planned for me. So I left. I moved to Chicago with nothing but a duffel bag and a stubborn belief that I could make it on my own. The city was everything I dreamed it would be: loud, chaotic, and full of opportunity. I got a job as a waitress and spent my nights bar hopping with my roommates. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Then I met Adam. He was older, charismatic, wealthy, and utterly out of my league. He swept me off my feet with expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and whispered promises of a future together. I thought I was in love. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. I told Adam, expecting him to hold me, to tell me we'd figure it out together. Instead, he laughed. "Get rid of it," he said, as casually as if he were talking about taking out the trash. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Don't be stupid, Olivia," he continued. "You think I'm gonna let some waitress ruin my life? Handle it, or I will." I never saw him again. The next few weeks were a blur of panic and despair. I couldn't go home. My parents would disown me the moment they found out I was pregnant and unmarried. My roommates were no help. They told me I was ruining my life by keeping the baby. But I couldn't bring myself to terminate the pregnancy. My son, Caleb, was born on a freezing December night in a charity hospital. He had a full head of dark hair and the tiniest hands I'd ever seen. I loved him immediately, even as I hated myself for bringing him into a world where I couldn't give him what he deserved. The first year was hell. I worked double shifts at the diner to pay for daycare, formula, and diapers. I barely slept, barely ate, and cried more than I care to admit. But Caleb was my light. Every time he smiled or giggled, it felt like the universe was telling me it was all worth it. Then everything fell apart. When Caleb was 18 months old, he got sick. At first, it was just a fever, but within days he was struggling to breathe. I rushed him to the ER, where they diagnosed him with pneumonia. I sat by his hospital bed, holding his tiny hand and praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. "Please," I whispered, "I'll do anything. Just let him be okay." But the bills started piling up. Even with insurance, the cost of Caleb's hospital stay, medications, and follow-up care was astronomical. I couldn't keep up. I was drowning in debt, and no amount of extra shifts could save me. Then one night, as I sat in the hospital cafeteria staring at a collection notice, I overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two nurses were talking about a couple who had just adopted a baby. "They've been on the waiting list for years," one of them said. "It's such a shame they can't have kids of their own, but now they finally have their family." My heart stopped. The next day, I asked to speak with a social worker. I told her I was overwhelmed, that I couldn't provide the life Caleb deserved. Within a week, I was meeting with a couple who seemed like they'd stepped out of a parenting magazine. They were kind, loving, and financially stable, everything I wasn't. They adored Caleb instantly. And Caleb, too young to understand what was happening, smiled and reached for them like they were old friends. When the papers were signed, I told myself it was the best thing for him, that he would have a better life without me. But walking away from that courthouse, knowing I would never see my son again, felt like someone had ripped my heart out. I spent the next few years in a fog. I moved to a different city, changed jobs, and told everyone I met that I didn't have kids. But the guilt never went away. I thought about Caleb every day. On his first day of kindergarten, I imagined him walking into a classroom with a Spider-Man backpack, his hair neatly combed. When he turned 10, I pictured him blowing out candles on a birthday cake, surrounded by friends. And when he turned 18, I wondered if he would try to find me. But he never did. A few months ago, I came across a photo on Facebook of a young man who looked exactly like Adam. My heart stopped. It was Caleb. I knew it was him. He was standing with his adoptive parents, smiling, holding up a diploma. He looked happy. He looked loved. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Because no matter how much I told myself I had done the right thing, I couldn't escape the truth. I had given up my child. And I had no right to call myself his mother. So here I am, spilling my soul to strangers because I don't know what else to do. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I needed someone to hear my story. To know that I loved him, even if I wasn't strong enough to keep him. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to end up on a platform like the Listening Room 808, pouring out the darkest chapter of my life. But there's something about anonymity that gives you the courage to say things you've been burying for years. Things so monstrous you can barely admit them to yourself. What I'm about to confess will sound unforgivable. It might make you hate me, and maybe I deserve that. But you promised no judgment, and I need to believe someone out there can just listen. Because I haven't told a soul, not even my husband. It began 12 years ago. I was 24, freshly married to Mark, and expecting my first child. We were living in a small town in Texas, scraping by on his job at a construction company while I worked part-time at a diner. We didn't have much, but we were happy, or at least I thought we were. When our daughter Ava was born, she became our whole world. She was bright, curious, and beautiful, with her father's big blue eyes and my stubborn chin. For the first few years, our life was simple and full of love. Then came Lily. Lily was our second daughter, born 4 years after Ava. From the moment she arrived, something felt different. She wasn't like other babies. She cried constantly, rarely slept, and seemed to flinch at every touch. The doctors told us she was colicky, but I knew it was more than that. By the time Lily was 2, we had a diagnosis: severe autism with sensory processing disorder. She couldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact, and had violent meltdowns over the smallest things. A light being too bright, the sound of water running, the texture of her clothes. Our lives became a prison of routines and chaos. I quit my job to care for Lily full-time, while Mark took on overtime to cover the mounting therapy bills. Ava, just 6 at the time, was left to fend for herself. I tried to balance it all, but Lily's needs consumed me. Ava started slipping through the cracks, forgotten in the shadow of her sister's demands. One night, Ava came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up after another one of Lily's meltdowns. She asked if we could play a game together, just the two of us. "I can't right now, sweetheart," I said, exhaustion dripping from my voice. "But you never can," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I wanted to hug her, to tell her she mattered just as much as Lily. But Lily started screaming in the other room, and I had to leave Ava standing there, alone again. The years passed in a blur of therapy appointments, sleepless nights, and broken promises. Ava grew distant, retreating into herself. By the time she was 10, she barely spoke to me. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Mark had taken Ava to the park to give me a break. I was home with Lily, who was having one of her worst meltdowns yet. She was screaming, biting, and clawing at her own skin. I tried everything: soothing words, her favorite blanket, even her weighted vest. But nothing worked. In a moment of desperation, I locked myself in the bathroom. I sat on the cold tile floor, my hands shaking, and for the first time I thought, I can't do this anymore. The thought horrified me, but it wouldn't go away. Over the next few months, it grew louder, creeping into every corner of my mind. I started fantasizing about a life without Lily. A life where Ava could have her mother back, where Mark and I could laugh again, where I wasn't drowning every single day. And then one day I made a choice. I told Mark I needed a break, a weekend away to recharge. He was hesitant, but he agreed. I packed a bag, kissed Ava and Lily goodbye, and drove 3 hours to a cabin in the woods. But I didn't go alone. I brought Lily with me. The cabin was small and secluded, surrounded by thick woods. I told myself this was just a trial, a way to see if we could handle being away from the world together. But deep down, I knew what I was planning. The first night, I gave Lily her usual dinner, tucked her into bed, and sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames. My mind raced with guilt, fear, and an overwhelming sense of relief at the thought of what I was about to do. I had brought a bottle of sleeping pills with me. My plan was simple: crush them into her juice, let her drift off peacefully, and leave her in the woods. But when the moment came, I couldn't do it. I stood over her, the crushed pills in one hand and the juice in the other, and I broke down. I sobbed until my chest ached, until I couldn't see through the tears. I hated myself for even considering it. The next morning, I packed up the car and drove us back home. I told Mark and Ava the trip had been great, that I felt recharged and ready to take on the world. But nothing had changed. The guilt ate at me every day. I started drinking to numb the pain, and my marriage began to crumble. Ava grew more distant, and Mark threw himself into work, leaving me alone with my shame. That was 6 years ago. Today, Lily is 12, Ava is 16, and Mark and I are still married, though just barely. I've never told anyone about that weekend in the cabin, and I doubt I ever will. But the weight of it is suffocating me. I love Lily. I do. But I can't help but wonder what our lives would have been like without her. So here I am, confessing to strangers because I can't carry this burden alone anymore. I know you'll judge me. How could you not? I judged myself every day for years, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there will understand.